Here's a conversational, psychologically grounded expansion that keeps the central idea nuanced. Confusion can sometimes accompany vulnerability, but confusion alone is never proof of love. 1. Of the most confusing things about attraction is that we often expect feelings to make a person more consistent. We think, if he really likes me, surely I'll know. Surely his behavior will become clearer. Surely the closer he gets to me, the more certain he'll become. And sometimes that is exactly what happens. But human beings are not always that simple. Sometimes when a man begins to care about you more deeply, his behavior can actually become more complicated before it becomes more secure. He may move toward you, then suddenly become quieter. He may be warm and attentive one day, then more distant the next. He may initiate connection and then seem to retreat when the emotional intensity increases. And this is where women can become trapped in a very painful question: what did I do wrong? But before you make his behavior about your worth, you have to understand something about human psychology. Closeness does not only create pleasure, closeness also creates vulnerability. When someone is casual in your life, there is very little to lose. If the relationship doesn't work, you can walk away relatively untouched. Your identity remains intact. Your emotional world remains protected. But when someone starts to matter, the psychological equation changes. Suddenly, there is something at stake. Now your opinion matters more. Your rejection hurts more. Your absence becomes more noticeable. Your approval carries more weight. And for someone who has learned throughout his life to protect himself emotionally, that can create an internal conflict. Part of him says, I want to get closer. Another part says, be careful. This person now has the ability to hurt you. And that conflict can sometimes show up as contradictory behavior. This is why you should never interpret every moment of distance as evidence that his feelings have disappeared. And this distinction is incredibly important. You should also never romanticize inconsistency simply because you want his behavior to mean something deeper. Because there is a huge difference between a man who is temporarily overwhelmed by vulnerability and a man who simply doesn't have enough interest or intention to build something with you. And your emotional maturity comes from learning to tell the difference. Think about it this way. A man who cares but struggles with vulnerability may pull back, but eventually he finds his way back toward connection. He may need space, but he doesn't use space as a weapon. He may become uncertain, but he doesn't deliberately keep you uncertain. His actions may fluctuate temporarily, but the overall direction of his behavior is still toward you. That's very different from someone who repeatedly disappears, returns when it's convenient, gives you affection when he wants attention, and withdraws whenever you ask for clarity. The first is emotional conflict. The second may simply be emotional unavailability. And women often confuse the two because we are naturally inclined to search for meaning in someone's inconsistency. We think, maybe he's scared because he likes me so much. Maybe, but maybe, is not a relationship. You don't build your emotional life around potential explanations for someone's behavior. You observe patterns. This is where psychological intelligence becomes more valuable than romantic fantasy. Instead of asking, what does his silence mean? Ask, what does he consistently do? Instead of asking, why did he pull away? Ask, what happens after he pulls away? Does he come back with greater clarity? Does he acknowledge the distance? Does he make an effort to repair the connection? Does he become more emotionally available over time? Does he demonstrate through his choices that the relationship matters? Because love isn't revealed by one confusing moment. Love is revealed through patterns of behavior, and this is particularly important because sometimes a woman will become addicted to interpreting a man's mixed signals. Every text becomes evidence, every pause becomes a mystery, every change in tone becomes something to decode. And eventually, she stops experiencing the relationship and starts studying it. She's no longer asking, how do I feel when I'm with this person? She's asking, what does this behavior mean? That's a dangerous shift, because when you spend too much time decoding someone, you can lose contact with your own experience. You can become so focused on understanding him that you stop asking whether his behavior is actually meeting your needs. And this is where self-respect enters the conversation. You don't need to become a detective in order to be loved. You don't need to decode every silence. You don't need to earn clarity by becoming more attractive, more patient, more understanding, or more accommodating. A healthy relationship may contain uncertainty at times. Of course it will. Two human beings are not machines. People have fears, histories, insecurities, stress, and emotional blind spots. But healthy love gradually reduces unnecessary uncertainty. It doesn't make confusion the permanent environment of the relationship. That's the philosophical distinction I want you to remember. Temporary confusion can be part of intimacy. Chronic confusion is often a sign that intimacy is not being handled well. And those are two very different things. Imagine a man who becomes unusually quiet after realizing that his feelings are getting serious. Perhaps he's never been comfortable talking about emotion. Perhaps he has built his identity around independence. Perhaps being deeply cared for feels unfamiliar to him. You don't have to panic. You don't have to chase him. You don't have to immediately assume you've lost him. You can give the situation room to reveal itself. Because if the feeling is real, time often brings the person back toward honesty. But now imagine another man who repeatedly gives you intense attention, disappears, returns when he senses you moving on, becomes affectionate again, and then disappears once more. You might tell yourself he's confused, but after 6 months, a year, or 2 years, the question isn't whether he's confused anymore. The question is whether you are willing to keep living inside his confusion. That's the difference between compassion and self-abandonment. You can understand someone's fear without volunteering to suffer indefinitely because of it. You can have empathy for his emotional limitations without making those limitations your responsibility. And this is especially powerful because real attraction isn't just about how strongly someone feels. It's about what someone does with what they feel. A man can have feelings for you and still be incapable of giving you the relationship you want. Both things can be true. He can miss you and still not be ready. He can care about you and still be inconsistent. He can be afraid of losing you and still fail to choose you properly. And understanding that can save you from one of the most painful mistakes in dating, believing that someone's feelings automatically guarantee their capacity for commitment. They don't. Feelings are internal. Relationships are behavioral. That's why the woman who understands hidden psychology doesn't become obsessed with proving that a man loves her. She watches how his emotions translate into choices. Does he move toward you? Does he make room for you? Does he communicate? Does he repair things when they go wrong? Does he become more consistent? as trust develops? Does he take responsibility for the impact of his actions? Those questions tell you far more than whether he occasionally acts nervous, distant, jealous, or confused. Because the goal isn't to find a man who never experiences fear. The goal is to find someone who can experience fear and still move toward a healthy relationship. That's emotional courage, and perhaps that's the most important thing to understand about male psychology here. Sometimes a man's greatest confusion isn't about whether he wants you. It's about what happens to him when he realizes how much he wants you. But your job isn't to solve that conflict for him. Your job is to watch what he does with it. Because when a man truly values a connection, even if he struggles emotionally, there eventually comes a point where his actions begin answering the question his words couldn't. So don't measure love by how confusing someone can make you feel. Measure it by the direction of their behavior. Because the right person may sometimes be afraid of getting closer, but they won't make you spend your life wondering whether they intend to. Absolutely, here's the second segment, designed to flow naturally from the first by moving from ** contradictory behavior ** into the deeper issue of ** feelings that are stronger than a man's ability to verbalize them **. And once you understand that, we arrive at something even more interesting, because sometimes the confusion isn't created by what a man does. It's created by the gap between what he does and what he says. You may have a man who remembers things you mentioned weeks ago. He notices when your mood changes. He checks whether you've arrived home safely. He makes small adjustments to accommodate you. He notices details that most people overlook. He finds reasons to be around you. He becomes curious about your world. And yet, if you ask him directly what he feels, suddenly the confidence disappears. He might say, "I don't know." He might say, "Let's just see where this goes." He might change the subject. And you're left thinking, how can someone behave as though I matter so much and still struggle to tell me that I matter? This is where we need to understand something fundamental about human beings. Feeling something and expressing something are two completely different psychological processes. A person can experience an emotion internally long before they have the language, courage, or emotional maturity to communicate it externally. And this isn't exclusively male, it's human. But many men are socialized in ways that make this particularly complicated. From an early age, many boys receive subtle messages about emotional expression. Be strong, don't overreact. Don't appear needy, don't let people see that you're hurt. Don't expose too much, solve the problem instead of talking about the feeling. Eventually, a man can become extremely competent at experiencing emotion without becoming equally competent at communicating it. He can love deeply and still struggle to say, "I'm afraid of losing you." He can miss you, and instead of saying, "I miss you," he'll find some practical reason to contact you. He can care about your opinion and never admit how much your approval affects him. He can become emotionally attached while continuing to behave as though everything is casual. And this creates one of the great misunderstandings between men and women. One person may be communicating through words. The other may be communicating through behavior, and both may believe the other person isn't communicating at all. But here's where we need to be careful, because there is a seductive idea in dating that says, if he doesn't say it, look at what he does. And there is truth in that. Actions matter enormously, but actions should not become an excuse for avoiding communication forever. If a man brings you coffee every morning but refuses to acknowledge what the relationship is, you don't simply say, well, his actions speak louder than words. Sometimes actions reveal affection. Sometimes actions reveal habit. Sometimes they reveal convenience. Sometimes they reveal attraction without commitment. So the mature approach isn't to choose between words and actions. It's to look for alignment between them over time. Because eventually, a healthy relationship requires both. This is where emotional intelligence becomes powerful. Instead of obsessing over one romantic gesture, you begin looking at the pattern. Does he consistently make an effort? Does he become more open as trust develops? Does he allow you to know him? Does he let himself be emotionally seen? Does he communicate when something matters? Does he make choices that acknowledge the importance of the relationship? Because if his feelings are real but his emotional vocabulary is limited, you should see gradual movement. Maybe slowly, maybe imperfectly, but movement, that's what matters. The problem begins when women mistake emotional potential for emotional availability. A man may have deep feelings inside him and still be completely unavailable to you. That's an uncomfortable truth, but it's an important one. Because you are not dating someone's hidden potential. You are dating their demonstrated capacity. You cannot build a relationship with the feelings someone might eventually learn how to express. You build it with what they are capable of bringing into the relationship now, and this is where many women get trapped. They see the glimpse, they see the tenderness, they see the moment when his guard comes down, they see the way he looks at them when he thinks they aren't watching. They see the rare vulnerable conversation at 2 in the morning, and they think, there he is, that's the real him, maybe it is. But the question isn't whether that version of him exists. The question is whether he can consistently bring that version of himself into a relationship. Because anyone can have a beautiful moment, a relationship requires a pattern, and there's a profound psychological reason why we become so attached to these rare moments. Intermittent reinforcement. When affection appears unpredictably, the brain can become unusually focused on obtaining it again. You don't know when the next message will arrive. You don't know when he'll become warm again. You don't know when he'll open up. And because the reward is unpredictable, you may become even more preoccupied with it. You start waiting for the next emotional high. The next beautiful conversation, the next glimpse of vulnerability, the next moment when he makes you feel chosen. And suddenly, you're not evaluating the relationship objectively anymore, you're chasing the exception. That's why you must ask yourself a very difficult question. Am I in love with the relationship I consistently experience, or am I attached to the moments that prove the relationship could be something more? Those are not the same thing, and this is where the idea of hidden male psychology can become dangerous if we use it incorrectly. We don't want to teach women how to rationalize poor behavior. We want to teach women how to understand behavior without abandoning their standards. Yes, a man may communicate love indirectly. Yes, he may struggle to articulate vulnerability. Yes, he may express attachment through practical actions rather than emotional speeches. But none of that means you should accept perpetual ambiguity. Understanding someone does not mean lowering your expectations of them. In fact, genuine understanding can make your standards clearer. You can say, I understand that emotional conversations are difficult for you. I can be patient with you learning how to communicate, but I also need a relationship where communication exists. That's not pressure, that's clarity. And clarity is not the enemy of romance. Clarity protects romance from becoming resentment. Because eventually, unspoken feelings become a problem when the other person is forced to constantly interpret them. Imagine spending months asking yourself, does he actually care? That question itself is exhausting. A healthy connection should gradually answer it, not through one dramatic declaration, through hundreds of small choices. He calls when he says he'll call. He follows through. He remembers. He listens. He makes space. He repairs. He tells you when something is wrong. He doesn't punish you with silence. He doesn't make you compete for basic affection. He doesn't keep you permanently guessing. And perhaps most importantly, he becomes increasingly willing to let you see the emotional reality behind his behavior. Because love, at its healthiest, moves from mystery toward intimacy. Attraction can be mysterious. Love eventually becomes knowable. That's a beautiful distinction. Attraction often begins with uncertainty. Does he like me? Is she interested? What does that look mean? But as intimacy develops, the questions should gradually change. Can I trust him? Can we communicate? Can we repair conflict? Can we depend on each other? Can we tell each other the truth? That is the progression from chemistry to relationship. And if you're constantly stuck at the first question, despite months or years of interaction, something is wrong. Not necessarily with his feelings, but perhaps with his capacity to turn those feelings into a relationship. And that distinction can liberate you, because you don't have to prove that he secretly loves you. You don't have to decode every hidden signal. You don't have to convince yourself that his silence is actually depth. You can simply observe, give him the opportunity to reveal himself. If he cares but struggles to communicate, space and safety may allow him to become more expressive. If he genuinely wants you, his behavior will increasingly move toward clarity, and if he doesn't, eventually the pattern will reveal that too. You don't need to force the answer. You need to stop interfering with the evidence. Let his actions accumulate. Let time expose consistency. Let his choices tell you what his words cannot. Because at the end of the day, the most powerful question isn't, does he have feelings for me? The more important question is, can he turn those feelings into the kind of love I can actually live inside? Because hidden feelings may explain a man's behavior, but only visible choices can build your future. And that's the difference between being someone's emotional possibility and being someone's actual partner. So don't chase the feeling he struggles to name. Watch for the relationship he is willing to create. Because real love doesn't just hide inside someone. Eventually, it finds a way to show up. Absolutely, this final segment can bring the speech to its deepest psychological point. Asterisk asterisk, the tension between wanting emotional closeness and fearing emotional dependence, asterisk asterisk, while keeping the message grounded in self-respect rather than romanticizing mixed signals. And this brings us to perhaps the deepest form of confusion a woman can experience with a man. Because sometimes a man isn't confused about whether he wants you. He's confused about what it means that he wants you. And that distinction changes everything. There is a moment in emotional attachment when another person stops being simply someone you enjoy and becomes someone whose presence begins to affect your internal world. Their opinion matters, their absence is felt, their disappointment carries weight, their happiness begins to matter to you in a way that you didn't consciously choose. And suddenly, something that once felt exciting begins to feel dangerous, because when you genuinely care about someone, you have given them something that can be lost. That's the paradox of intimacy. The deeper you love, the more vulnerable you become. You cannot experience profound connection without accepting some degree of emotional risk. And for someone who has spent years protecting his independence, that realization can be unsettling. He may have been perfectly comfortable when the relationship felt casual. He could flirt, he could joke. He could disappear for a day and not think much about it. He could tell himself, "I'm not emotionally invested." But then something changes. He starts imagining you not being there. He notices when you become distant. He wonders who you're talking to. He starts caring about what you think of him. He begins making decisions with you in mind, and suddenly the relationship has psychological consequences. Now he isn't just enjoying you, he's attached to you, and attachment creates vulnerability. This is where some men begin behaving in ways that seem contradictory. He may want reassurance but avoid asking for it. He may become more attentive while pretending he doesn't care. He may become unusually sensitive to changes in your behavior. He may pull back when he feels himself becoming too dependent. He may even become more guarded immediately after a deeply intimate moment, and a woman can look at this and think, why did he get closer and then suddenly become distant? Sometimes the answer is simple, because closeness made the stakes real. But again, I want to make this distinction very carefully. His fear does not automatically mean his love is profound. Fear is not proof of love. Jealousy is not proof of love. Possessiveness is not proof of love. Distance is not proof of love. What matters is what he does with those emotions. Because emotional maturity is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to experience fear without allowing fear to control your behavior. A mature man can think, this relationship matters to me, and that scares me. But instead of punishing you for making him vulnerable, he learns how to communicate. Instead of disappearing, he explains. Instead of creating jealousy, he creates security. Instead of keeping you guessing, he gradually becomes more transparent. That's the difference between emotional fear and emotional irresponsibility. And this is where women sometimes make a painful mistake. They see a man pulling away and think, he must be scared because he cares so much. So they chase him. They reassure him, they pursue him, they try to convince him that it's safe to love them. They become extraordinarily patient. They start doing the emotional work for two people, and without realizing it, they have transformed his fear into their responsibility. That's not intimacy, that's emotional overfunctioning. You cannot love someone into emotional readiness. You cannot communicate enough for someone who refuses to communicate. You cannot provide enough reassurance to eliminate a fear that someone is unwilling to confront within themselves. At some point, the other person has to participate. That's what partnership means. And here's something psychologically fascinating. Sometimes a man isn't afraid of losing the woman because he doesn't care. He's afraid of losing control of himself. He's used to being independent. He's used to making decisions without consulting anyone. He's used to not needing emotional reassurance. And suddenly, another person's presence has become important enough to influence his emotional state. That can feel like a loss of freedom, but healthy love doesn't require the loss of freedom. It requires the expansion of your definition of freedom. Real maturity is understanding that dependence and weakness are not the same thing. Needing someone emotionally does not make you powerless. It simply means you've allowed someone to matter, and that's one of the great risks of adulthood. We spend so much of our lives trying to become independent, strong, self-sufficient, and emotionally protected. Then, one day, we meet someone who makes us realize that strength isn't only about needing nobody. Sometimes strength is having the courage to need someone without losing yourself. That's a much more sophisticated form of strength, and perhaps some men have never learned it. So when they begin to experience genuine attachment, they oscillate. They move closer, then they retreat. They open up, then they become guarded. They show affection, then they act indifferent. Not because the feelings necessarily disappeared, but because their internal system hasn't learned how to hold intimacy and independence at the same time. And this is why patience can sometimes be valuable, but patience must have boundaries. You can give someone room to grow. You cannot give them unlimited access to your emotional life while they remain undecided about whether they want to participate in it. There's a difference between giving someone time and putting your life on hold, and that distinction matters enormously. Because sometimes the woman becomes so focused on understanding the man that she forgets to understand herself. She asks, why is he scared? Why does he pull away? Why does he come back? Why does he act jealous? Why does he care but refuse to commit? But perhaps the more powerful question is, how does this relationship make me feel? Do I feel secure? Do I feel respected? Do I feel valued? Do I feel emotionally safe? Do I feel like I can express my needs without being punished for having them? Do I feel chosen? Because psychological insight should never become a substitute for emotional well-being. You can understand why someone behaves badly and still decide that the behavior isn't acceptable for you. That's maturity. You can have compassion without self-sacrifice. You can understand his wounds without volunteering to become their treatment. And if a man truly fears losing you, eventually that fear has to become responsibility. It has to make him more intentional, more communicative, more present, more willing to protect the relationship. Otherwise, what you are witnessing isn't love becoming deeper. You're simply witnessing someone experiencing emotion without knowing how to turn emotion into action. And that distinction is everything, because love is not measured by the intensity of someone's internal struggle. It's measured by the quality of the relationship they are willing to build. Think about that. A man can lie awake at night thinking about you. He can miss you desperately. He can feel jealous. He can be terrified that you'll leave. He can have incredibly strong emotions and still not be capable of giving you a healthy relationship. Strong feelings do not automatically produce healthy behavior. That's why you should never confuse emotional intensity with emotional maturity. Intensity says, I feel a lot. Maturity says, I know what to do with what I feel. And that is what you should ultimately look for. Not a man who never gets scared. Not a man who never becomes uncertain. Not a man who always knows exactly what to say. Look for a man who can confront his own fear. A man who can say, this matters to me, and I'm going to communicate. A man who can recognize when his behavior is creating insecurity and take responsibility for it. A man who doesn't expect you to chase him every time he retreats. A man who understands that if he wants the privilege of being loved deeply, he must also accept the responsibility of creating emotional safety. That's what makes love sustainable, because eventually, every meaningful relationship reaches the same crossroads. You can protect yourself from vulnerability, or you can learn how to become vulnerable responsibly. You can keep everyone at a safe distance, or you can let someone matter. You can keep asking, how do I avoid getting hurt? Or you can begin asking, how do I build something where both people are safe enough to be honest? And perhaps that's the hidden psychology we should really be talking about. Not how to decode a man's fear, not how to manipulate his attachment, not how to make him chase, but how to recognize whether his feelings are producing courage. Because anyone can feel, anyone can desire, anyone can miss you, anyone can become emotionally overwhelmed. But love asks for something more demanding. It asks for responsibility. It asks for consistency. It asks for communication. It asks us to stop protecting ourselves at the expense of the person we claim to care about. So if he becomes confused because he is beginning to realize how much you matter, give him the opportunity to meet that realization with maturity. Don't chase, don't diagnose, don't rescue, watch. Let his choices speak. Because eventually, every man has to answer the same question for himself. Now that this person matters to me, what am I willing to do about it? And that is where confusion ends. Not when he becomes fearless, but when his courage becomes greater than his fear. Because real love isn't the absence of vulnerability. Real love is what two people build when they are brave enough to be vulnerable and responsible enough not to make that vulnerability someone else's burden.